So carbohydrates is going to be a big focus today, and we're going to just discuss like the basics in terms of trying to understand overall content, why we would shift towards certain carbs at certain times, and a bit more realistic expectation of what we would do with the carb. So carbs and calories. A gram of carbs is worth 4 calories, so this will be essentially part of the makeup that's going to be your day-to-day eating. The structure of carbs is going to be a big influence in terms of how we would do certain things, in terms of when we would have certain foods, and kind of linked to what you might already know. So if you watch TV and you see anything like the Belvita or the breakfast bars, you'll see something where they'll say, this will last you all day. And there is some truth to that. Essentially, the main carbs that you're going to look at are going to be simple and complex. Simple being that they can be broken down very, very quickly and used by the body, and the complex, harder to break down because of more complex structure. So you look at words like monosaccharides and polysaccharides. That's a bit for later down the line. But if we're looking at just basics for the time being, essentially the quicker that the sugars from the carbs can be broken down, the quicker they can be used turned from glycogen to glucose and then used. If the body doesn't need them at that point, it will be stored as glycogen in the liver, because the main sources and main storage points of glucose and glycogen will be the liver and the muscle. So because it's the muscle, it becomes very important in terms of us understanding preloading in terms of carbs, and then also during and after. So this is when the manipulation of carbs for pre-training, during training and after training become a little bit more important. So if we are going to train in the morning, we would generally look to a more complex carb the night before, so it can be slowly broken down, and then we have the energy source ready to go. If we are talking a couple of hours before, we look at something relatively easy, because we also need to account for digestion and the ability to digest this food quite quickly. So if we're looking at something complex, you typically would look at oats or pasta. If we're looking an hour or two before, we're generally looking towards like toast, honey and a fruit salad. When we start dipping into closer periods, it's going to be having to be something quick to digest. So anything like a smoothie where we don't have to break down the food, and then something also that's going to be very, very, very quick for the body to actually digest and absorb. So you're talking, popular favourite will be Rice Krispie Squares, etc, etc. For during, if it's anything over 2 hours, we're looking at about 60 grams per hour, and then past about 3 hours, we're looking at about 90 grams. This will generally vary from person to person, because obviously the smaller or bigger a person is, the more energy they may require, because the normal functions of the body will still be going. When we get to post-training, we will essentially need to look in terms of glycogen replenishment from using it, so that we can build back to that baseline of calories. Because we've been using them so frequently, the replenish rate is about 150%. So us taking in these carbs quite quickly as simple, something easy to digest, cereal, banana, bagel, dead easy ones to knock off, we then look at that in terms of the structure of our post-workout nutrition, along with protein to aid recovery. So we would gel all these together just so that we can actually formulate a plan in terms of pre, during and post nutrition, and then actually look at what foods might be needed for each. Naturally, for the recovery side, protein will be alongside, but then you'll look at certain processes that come with carbs, in terms of carbs helps serotonin production, and the serotonin is the happy hormone, and then you roll this over in terms of tryptophan needed, which is coming from protein sources, and the amino acids of these. We'll dip into protein in another video, but essentially you need the carbs and the tryptophan to then create melatonin. Melatonin being a big one in terms of sleep. So we would basically just structure everything together just so everything can work together for us to basically be fed and our energy systems to operate at the best potential possible, especially when we're looking at longer time frame training. So all this can be plotted together in terms of sport nutrition, When it comes to a day to day, we're generally just going to look at splitting the feeding and putting a bit more feeding time towards our morning and our pre and post training, because naturally if we're going to be burning energy throughout the day, we want to start the day with said energy and not put it right at the end unless we're training the next morning, because it's just going to be wasted calories at that point. Well, not wasted, unnecessary calories at that point to be putting into this zone, so then we just space it out accordingly to where it might be needed. So we can be a little bit smarter in terms of our selection of when we have carbs, what carbs we have, and how this will be affected